Welcome to the podcast, Chris. Good to have you here.
Great. Thank you very much, Maulik. Good to be here.
You know, I have plenty of questions for you about obviously what you're up to now and where you're heading in the future. But I want to start off with taking us all back in time. From what I gather, you had your first entrepreneurial venture when you were just 10 years old, where you were, I guess, buying floppy disks in Canada and then selling it in UK for a huge profit. Can you take us through that episode of your life?
My goodness, yeah. My parents were living in Africa as I was, and the Canadian government was very helpful to send me to private school in the UK, and I couldn't necessarily compete with my peer set there, just from a wealth and spending perspective. But I figured out that floppy disks in the UK were £5 a disc. And yet I could buy 10 in Canada for $10 Canadian. So I used to fill up my suitcase in Canada, take them over and sell them to my schoolmates for £4 a piece, and make a very sizable and nice profit that kept me going through the semesters for, candy and other things that a 10-year-old generally would like to consume at the time. But yeah, that was my first venture into thinking, there's something to this.
And then I understand that your first job was when you were just 12 years old, and I think you were helping a local business.
That's going back. I need to make money because I wanted to buy a computer. My parents couldn't afford to buy a computer, so the only job I could get that would hire a 12-year-old was construction. So I used to install kitchen cabinets and very nice kitchen cabinets. I was pretty handy and used to work on construction sites after hours and during the summer and everything else to make money, which was pretty good money at the time, to buy my first computer. And then as soon as I got my first computer, I thought, this physical labor stuff, it's breaking me. I gotta use my head. I gotta use my mind, and started using my computer to try and make some money.
Oh, that's awesome. Were you any good at the kitchen? Because I do have a remodeling project at my home, and I don't know whether I can afford you.
I was actually pretty good, Maulik. I was actually pretty good. I actually love it, and for off times, I just built a deck not that long ago in Manila, of all places, just to keep up my skills. You never know when I might need to go back to construction.
So something else that I found quite interesting about your background, Chris, and that many people may not know, is that you actually spent some early years of your life in Lesotho and Swaziland, which are the two enclaved countries within the borders of South Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you end up there?
It's funny. As a segue, what I cannot believe now is you can go on Google Maps and travel around the streets that I grew up in. Blows my mind. But at the time, my parents were working for the Canadian government. My dad was working for CETA, and his job was to go over and build schools in the neighborhood with government funds, sort of like an NGO, and build paying teachers and making sure that the education system was going along. So moved over when I was just born. I think I was about 1.5 years, 2 years, and lived there until I was around 8. But still had very, very clear memories. Very, very clear memories of just the nature and the noise and frankly just the countryside and everything else. It was quite a unique thing that when I first started getting into cities, I'm like, my goodness, what is this? And why are there so many cars? And what's going on? Because at the time, very, very primitive when we were living there.
All this international experience that you had garnered by the time you're probably 18 years old has shaped you as a global executive, because I have seen you now in action here in the Philippines, and you are so effortless, you are at ease. And I also met you in the US at a Microsoft event, if you remember.
That's right.
And you were at home again. So obviously, you are an international man of mystery, but do you think that having traveled in your early years has kind of shaped you as a person?
For sure. Absolutely. It's funny, when we first started the parent company that got into the BPO business, the reason I was picked was that I was one of the few people who had actually spent a lot of time in different countries. And, when you think about being a global executive or forget about even executive, but when you think about working with people around the world, there's nothing better than being in the countries. There's nothing better than sharing a meal. There's nothing better than understanding the culture, because once you do, it gives you a totally different perspective. And therefore it enables you to connect at a very much deeper level. And I think have a much more rewarding kind of relationship, frankly, as you go forward. And without that sort of being brought up in that different environment, traveling a lot during my teens, I think it would have been very, very different for me. I mean, who knows, I could be staying in Canada right now and doing something completely different. So I always encourage people to travel, and I always laugh at these global executives that we interview, and I'm like, how many countries have you been to? And it's like, not that many. And do you travel? Well, I can do everything by phone call and Zoom. And it's like, no, you cannot. And really try and get people to kind of get out there and see the world.
One of the things that I want to dig deeper with you, Chris, is your professional career, right? I find it very fascinating because I see signs of entrepreneurial ventures and then working for some companies and then working for a very large company, Cinex.
Yeah, it's funny. I think the common thread, Maulik, is entrepreneurship. And, when I started Coral, many, many years ago, is because who's going to hire a 16-year-old, right? And computers at the time were just really kind of burgeoning, and really started my own business. And I grew it relatively large at the time, based in Canada, and also actually had operations in Africa, of all places. And then thought, gosh, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I don't know how to run businesses better. Maybe there's something else. And so sold it off and invested in a software company. We were the first Windows accounting package ever, Windows 3.0. Unfortunately, we named the company that in Spanish I think means no business, and effectively there was no business for it. And so lost a significant amount of money. And then, started doing consulting. And one of the individuals I ran into was a gentleman called Jim Estall, who's probably a very big influence in my life, who was on the board of Research in Motion, if you remember BlackBerry, the company called EMJ Data Systems. And he a lot of the tech in Canada, he's had his fingers in, but incredibly entrepreneurial. And so he was running a fairly big company, but because it was very entrepreneurial, because I was working for Jim directly, it didn't feel like it, right? It was very kind of a lot of freedom. And so helped him buy a company, Integrated, and then he got bought by Cinex. And I met the founder of Cinex, a guy called Bob Wong, who is another incredibly entrepreneurial individual. Started Cinex out of the trunk of his car, built it to a Fortune 500 company. Very few individuals can scale that way. Again, huge company, but Maulik, the guy was just so very tough taskmaster, very, very tough, but just incredibly entrepreneurial. And so his thing was, hey, we need to change the profile of the business. We need to raise our margins. We need to get into these different areas. We're thinking about services. We're thinking about a bunch of other things. Chris, you've traveled, you kind of know M&A, you've done integration, go for it. And what's better to be in a company with someone else's checkbook and build something up? It was fantastic. It was awesome. But honestly, then got involved with the BPO side. At the time, the company had bought what was Concentrix in 2003. It's about 25 people, 30 people, very, very small. Then we bought another small company, which, because I was doing the M&A, was Concentrix. And it was a couple $1 million and another 100 or so many people. And it started losing money after 2 months. And Bob got so upset with me. Like, how could you buy a company that's losing money? They said, you go fix it. I said, Bob, I know nothing about BPR. I know nothing about call center. Well, you bought it. You should know. You go fix it. The rest is history, as they say, Maulik.
I think you made a couple of really interesting points, and I want to, dig deeper on that. Here you are very entrepreneurial. Your company gets acquired by Cinex, which is a large organization. Typically, the acquired executives stay with the acquiring company no more than a year or two, and then they leave because they can't survive in that, bureaucracy or the big company organization. You stayed with Cinex for so many years.
Frankly, I never thought I'd work for a big company. Never thought I'd work for a big company. I hate politics. I hate bureaucracy. When I started at Cinex, I honestly thought I was only, to your point, 6 months. In fact, I wasn't even a permanent employee. And Bob said, hey, come down to California for a week. And the week turned into a month, and the month turned into 3 months. And then finally, after 6 months, I said, Bob, do I have a job? Like, should I get an apartment? I'm tired of a hotel. And he's like, sure, why not, right? But what it taught me, Maulik, was two things. One, it taught me about the power of culture, which I had never really appreciated. I always thought culture was those mission statements up on the wall that people kind of, didn't pay attention to, and it was great for clients, but didn't really mean anything. But Synnex had a very powerful culture driven by Bob. And he didn't care where you came from, he enabled people who had great ideas to do great things. And that's very unique in big businesses, very, very unique in big businesses, because generally they're very hierarchical, there's a lot of processes, and it's hard to kind of, frankly, stand out from the crowd until you kind of move your way up the organization. And I think Bob created a very unique culture around, hey, you've got a great idea, you can show your talent, willing to take a risk, let me see. And he used to talk about all these investments and all these areas as babies. And he said, when you have a baby, you need to take care of it more, you need to change its diaper more, you need to do all these things more. And so he almost spent more time with sort of new things than the current business that was just, highly efficient, running and doing very well. I think the second thing that is something that maybe is not the right way of putting it, but the freedom to be fired is a great thing. Because when you're not worried about, am I going to have a job or not, because, hey, I think pretty smart, and I think I'm employable, and I think I could probably go off and do something, then you can really be true to yourself and be passionate about, hey, this is what I think we should do. And people look for that. And frankly, the new working staff who are coming into the workforce are also looking for that. They want to have their opinions heard. They want to kind of have discussions. They want to kind of do it. And frankly, they're highly transient. If they don't like an environment or culture, they're more than happy to go across the road. And so it did kind of instill a lot of foundational elements of how we've built the Concentrix business and culture to this day to try and make sure that we attract and keep and find those folks who want to take risks and help support them grow their careers. Hopefully with us, obviously, but very foundational elements when I started working at Synnex.
My memory of meeting with you, Chris, for the first time was in 2010, right after I had joined SBI Global.
That's right.
You had invited me for a coffee at Manila Peninsula, and I remember that meeting very vividly, and you were very nice. What I remember so vividly about that meeting is not what happened during the meeting, but what happened after the meeting. We walk out of the lobby, and I thought, here is a president of a North American company. There must be a fancy car waiting for him outside with a chauffeur and a driver. And guess what? You just walk into one of the local taxi, you get in, and you drove off. And I thought, I actually remember telling my team about that episode. Is that still? I
still take Grab. In Manila, I still take Grab. Yeah, that's funny that's what you remember. That just seems very natural. Why would you have someone waiting around for you and doesn't seem highly efficient and kind of get on with things and do the things, right?
And that's probably, because of your upbringing where you were traveling around the world and you were at ease with it. So I think that played out a lot too.
Yeah, for sure. I also think, we often talk about being humble. I think it's underrated that people don't talk about a lot. And we had a great quarter this last quarter and became our own public company, 2 quarters ago, and frankly, a lot of success. And the number one message we continue to tell our staff is we got to be humble because you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And we have to count on people coming into work because they like to come into work. We have to count on our clients giving us business because we're doing the right job for them. And I just don't think there's much room to have an ego in this business, because I think as well, right? You ran a very, very large company. I always say you go from hero to zero in one call, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's no time for an ego. You just got to kind of get on with it, right? And I also think when you ask people to work hard, you can talk about culture all you want, but if you don't actually live it, it's very easy for people to kind of go, they say this, but they do that, right? And so very, very, very different. But that's funny. Yeah, I still take Grab around, still take the local stuff. It is what it is.
No, I was quite impressed with it, and as I said, I still remember it, and I wanted to talk about this in the podcast because I think anybody who's listening to it, here is an example of someone who is running the second largest BPO company. It's almost like a mini United Nations, 225,000 people across 40 countries, and takes a Grab. Let's dig deeper a bit on your M&A experience, and I want to really elicit some wisdom from you because you've done so many of them. As part of the Concentrix growth from 25 employees to whatever it is now, you've gone through multiple acquisitions. There are two that stand out the most for me. Obviously, the one, IBM Dux, that brought you into the big league in 2013.
Sure.
What I found fascinating about that acquisition, Chris, is that here is Concentrix, significantly smaller than IBM Dux. I mean, IBM Dux was like 4 or 5 times larger than you.
For sure.
It must have taken so much chutzpah and gumption to go out and talk to IBM Dux and say, hey, I'm a David, but I'm going to buy the Goliath. Tell us about that acquisition.
It's funny. At the time, we were around $200 million, give or take. We had around 11,000 people. And the discussion with our board of directors at the time was, look, we're too big to be small, we're too small to be big. You know, either we've got to really double down in this business, or honestly, we should get out of the business. All right, we should sell because we need to provide opportunities for our staff to continue to grow, and really that's how you do it. And so we were looking at multiple opportunities. I think I was very close to the time that I first met you, right? We were kind of scouring the world for what could we do. And we'd heard that IBM was looking at divesting a division, but it was an urban rumor. And, you know, a lot of calls finally got to somebody, said, well, maybe, and, you know, possibly, and we'll get back to you. And so, you know, someone called me and we had a conversation around the size of the business. And I'm like, wow, this is big. I can remember writing down a piece of paper, we're 11,000. Wow, they're 30,000. Oh, we're 200. Wow, they're $1 billion. Holy crap. And then like, how much is it going to be? And to be honest, the person threw out a price and I started laughing. I said, well, it's going to be a short conversation because we can't afford that. Like, I knew that I could no way get to the board to do that. And they were like, well, what are you thinking? And I said a price and they started laughing and said, like, there's no way we're going to do it for that. But anyhow, they said, well, we'll have a follow-up meeting and we'll see. And sure enough, through a lot of pushing and you know, a couple of meetings and you know, engagement, it's like, hey, I think we can get this done. And you know, the board was very, very supportive, kind of like, wow, this could really be pulled off. And you know, at the time, IBM they weren't in a hurry to divest, but they certainly said, look, this business needs to find life of itself, and we want to focus on software, and we want to focus on a whole host of other things. So we were able to get to a deal, but it was honestly, Maulik, it was one of the most surreal experiences of my life.
I want to pick your brain on your views on where the industry is going, not next quarter or next year, but in 2030, how different it would be from what it is now.
I think that's a fascinating question we actually spend a lot of time thinking about. And from my perspective, you know, a lot of the things that are sold now in terms of smoke and mirrors, like AI, right, which, you know, is not probably a meaningful contributor to changing the industry, I think in 2030 will be a meaningful contributor in the industry. I do believe that you're going to be able to do instant language translation on the fly in video. And so what's that going to mean for your global footprint, right? If translation can be done instantaneously and whether it be through text or chat or video or voice, you know, it's going to change things pretty dynamically. So more focus is going to have to be on country culture than language capabilities that kind of go along with it. I also think that, you know, you're going to get a lot more aggregation of companies in terms of supporting a customer experience. And you're getting that now. When you book a flight, you see, hey, there's a hotel and there's a car rental and you can book it all at the same place. But if you have a problem, you have to go to 3 or 4 different people to sort it out. And ultimately, I think where things are going is that you're going to call into one kind of aggregator of support experience or engagement experience, and they're going to be able to sort out everything for you, because that's what people are going to want. I clearly think, substantially more is going to be done digitally. There's still a huge, billions of transactions that I look at and kind of go, why are people touching these? There should be a mobile app, there should be automatic, there should be this, should be that. And I think, clearly a lot more goes digitally, which I think is a good thing, which means that the skill set in the BPO industry is really going to go upscale, which I think is fantastic. It means more pay, it means more intellectual stimulation, it means more engagement, it means more long-term careers around that. So I think that's really, really healthy for the business. And I'd love it to be faster than 2030, but certainly it's going down that path. And lastly, I think what's very underestimated is, in this business, there's a lot of gut feel. Because data is so disparate, and because people aren't good at capturing data, there's all these ideas about, well, we should create this for customer experience, and how do we measure? Well, we might measure by NPS, we might measure by this, we might measure by this. But the companies that are really cutting edge, the way they look at data, first of all, they have one database, they don't have disparate databases. Two, they really understand the analytics around it, and then they use it to make informed decisions around how to engage customers in a different way, like either what channel, what options, being predictive, so that Maulik, when you engage a brand, you don't have to say, hey, I'm Maulik and I dealt with you 2 weeks ago, and the telemetry from my device is telling you that my device is wrong, so I can just pick up the phone and say, hey Maulik, here's your problem. Or maybe I don't even need to call. Maybe you don't even need to call. I can preempt your call by knowing from a data perspective how to engage with you. Mm-hmm. So I think all those changes are going to drive huge change in our industry. And frankly, I think it's an exciting time, because as much change that's happened in the last 10 years, I only see it speeding up in the next 10 years.